Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our Mind and Body Wellness series. I'm April, a Missouri Show Me Hope crisis counselor with the Missouri Show Me Hope Crisis Counseling Program. Today I wanted to kind of dive into a topic that can be very sensitive for some, something that we kind of try to not necessarily tiptoe around it, but try to be mindful of what others might be thinking or feeling or going through before we talk about it. And that can be the topic of grief and loss. I know with COVID happening and everything that's been happening in our society, our world, our country, we're all experiencing a lot of different types of grief and loss. So I kind of wanted to do a little series within a series and talk about different types of grief and loss, different demographics that might be experiencing different types of grief, different types of loss, what you can do if you are going through something that you are coping with and grieving with. Sharing some tips, sharing some information that will hopefully help you in your journey and hopefully help you get on the right path to healing and resiliency. So I know a lot of us have been experiencing different types of grief during the pandemic, different types of loss. Not necessarily, sorry, there's some construction going on. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but so not necessarily is grief and loss just losing a loved one, losing a friend, losing somebody that is close to us and special to us. Grief and loss is actually a lot of different things that we might not think of and might not realize. Especially during the pandemic, I think a lot of people were dealing with that in different ways. Whether it is the loss of a job, everyone's schedules change. If you're working from home, you had the loss of your social interactions, you had the loss of your daily routine. All of those things are things that you had to adjust to and you had to find ways to cope with. And you grieved that, whether you realized it or not. Any change in your life, we grieve, whether we're resistant to the change that's happening, or whatever might come, but we grieve those different types of losses. I know for me, for instance, a loss that I had during the pandemic would have been my freedom to go to concerts, social activities, go to concerts, go to baseball games, traveling. I love to travel and do different things. And that was something that I struggled with personally. I had to find other outlets. Those were my stress relievers. Those were the things that kind of kept me grounded. And, if I was stressed, like, oh, there's a trip coming up. Oh, I have a baseball game coming up. Oh, I have a concert that I can't wait to go to. Having that excitement, having those things that we love to do and that we consider our coping skills, if we no longer have them anymore, we have to find different ways to adjust and different things that work for us. So maybe you had to take up journaling. Maybe you had to do talk therapy with friends, family, phone calls, talking with loved ones, listening to music. I know, like I mentioned, live music being something that I rely on, but using what you have, using a Spotify, Pandora, radio, whatever you might need to listen to that music to kind of help. So some common reactions to grief might include shock, disbelief, or being in denial, having increased anxiety. I know everyone probably typically had more anxiety during the pandemic anyway, but dealing with some sort of loss or adjustment can increase those feelings of anxiety. Distress, anger, we always talk about anger being a secondary emotion. So a lot of times we feel anger as the result of something else. So maybe it's disappointment, maybe it's fear, maybe we're feeling shameful and we kind of get angry at that because we don't like feeling that way. Periods of sadness, so depression, periods of feeling low, those are all very common. and loss of sleep or loss of appetite. One of the things you can do to kind of cope with a loss or something that you're going through is to make sure that you maintain your schedule as best as possible. So maintaining that sleep schedule and trying to maintain a healthy eating schedule as well, so you can try to keep your appetite as normal to you as possible. So I wanted to demonstrate a little, not necessarily exercise, but a little, what do I call it? Demonstration, I guess, if you will. Something that I always loved to do with my clients when I was a caseworker, to kind of demonstrate grief and loss. What grief, how it can feel to us. And I think this helped a lot for visualization. So imagine we have this box. This is called, I know everything's kind of backwards, but the ball in the box analogy, and is one of my absolute favorite things, because it painted a really good picture of how we can handle grief, how we experience grief, and how over time it can change. So here we have the ball in the box. So here we have our box. Over here, we have our trigger, our grief button. So this is what we feel. This is when this gets hit, we get triggered. We become emotional, angry, and all those feelings that accompany feeling grief. And then this ball, this is our grief. Now see how that ball almost fills up that entire box. And here's our button. So if this is our grief, every time we move, every time, there's no room in this box. The ball, our grief, takes up the entire thing. So anytime that we move, anytime we change, we're going to hit this button and we're going to feel that. We're going to feel those emotions. We're going to feel sad. We're going to feel mad, depressed. You're going to feel those things. So a little time passes, and the grief gets a little smaller. Things get a little easier. Things get a little easier to cope with. We're not triggered quite so easily. See how now this is our grief. Our grief is smaller. We have more room in our box. So our ball can move around a little more easily than it could before. We have more space, but it's inevitable that it's going to eventually hit this button. It's going to eventually hit our trigger, and it's going to cause all those emotions to come flying right back to us. And that can come, what we feel. This can be triggered by a song. It can be triggered by, maybe just a memory that you have. But no matter what, eventually, it's still going to hit that button. Whether we want it to or not, it's still going to be there. So again, our grief is changing, and over time it changes again. And here's our box, and you see how our grief is much, much smaller now. There's much more room for our grief to move around. Much more room in here. But then there's our trigger button still. So it's inevitable. Eventually, that's going to hit that button. But guess what? We have things that help us, like coping skills and talk therapy, like we said, our journaling, things that we can use to our advantage to help us. Things that, like we said, it's inevitable. We're going to feel those feelings of grief again. But we're going to use the things that help us, the things that make us feel better, whether that is seeing a counselor, talking with a caseworker, visiting with friends, visiting with family, doing the things that make us happy, that kind of allow us to celebrate what we're grieving over, but still being happy at the same time. And so a lot of people will experience grief in different ways. Adolescents, children, adults, all experience different changes. Focusing on adolescence might have changes in sleep patterns. Isolation is a big thing to look for. We'd want to make sure if we noticed a change in someone's behaviors, if they are kind of isolating a little more than usual. increased irritability or frustration, and just withdrawing from those activities that they once loved. So I think next week I'm going to focus a little bit on veterans and I know that we had September 11th recently, the 20th anniversary of that. We have a lot going on in our culture these days, with things happening overseas, very sensitive topics that can cause people to be experiencing some of that grief and some of that loss. So I think make sure to tune in next Tuesday to touch a little bit more on that topic. So remember to come back on Thursday of this week and join Mary Lou. She's going to have an activity for you guys that'll kind of pertain to the grief and loss that we talked about today. So make sure to come back and watch that with her. But as always, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us. You can email us. You can go to our website, pfh.org/prevention. And you can contact the 24/7 anonymous disaster distress helpline with the Missouri Show Me Hope program. And that's 1-800-985-5990. So again, if you need anything, if you have ideas for future videos that you want to see, you can contact us. You can comment on this video. But that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for joining me. And I hope you look forward to the rest of the week and join us for future videos. So be well and take care.